So, Alistair, one of the big changes that we've seen recently, or I say in the last few years anyway, is the way that tax now treats mortgage interest. So anybody buying a property in their own name nowadays cannot offset mortgage interest against their rent when they're calculating their profits. And when the result of this is we've seen a lot of people now buying into limited companies. But one of the things which I know confuses a lot of people, particularly when they're first starting out, is how that all works. Because, I mean, the main confusion is around the fact, well, if I've got this brand new company which hasn't ever done anything, it's got no income and no trading history, so why would a bank ever lend to it?
And a good question. The reality is banks take personal guarantees from the limited company directors. So that from a risk point of view, they're actually underwriting the application on the individual directors because they're taking the guarantee. The property or the security property, whether it's owned by a limited company or in personal names, it doesn't make any difference to the value or the rental income. It's still going to be the same. Almost all, in fact, never mind almost, all of them, to my knowledge, limited company buy-to-let lenders insist on taking personal guarantees from all the directors, shareholders. So the underwriting is exactly the same as it would be if a buy-to-let were taken out in your personal name. The only difference is at the legal side, the charge is registered against the limited company. There is a little bit more conveyancing required, and most lenders insist on separate legal representation. And as individuals, the directors of the company must take independent legal advice. So there is a little bit more complexity in the legal side and a little bit more cost. But the actual mechanics of underwriting and processing a limited company buy-to-let mortgage are identical to taking a buy-to-let mortgage in a personal name.
Yeah, so put simply, they look at you, but they give the money to the company. That's how it works. I mean, the whole thing around the guarantee is interesting because, again, I know that sometimes, particularly if you're new to this, people can get a bit hot under the collar about the idea that they have to guarantee paying back the mortgage. But as the way that I try and explain it is, well, if you took out the mortgage in your own name, would you expect to pay the mortgage back? And they say yes. And I said, well, within that paperwork, do you think it's not expressly stated that you will pay the mortgage back? And they go, yes. And I said, well, it's not any different than with a personal guarantee as a director. The bank will want their money back. It's as simple as that, really, isn't it? So I think it's one of those emotional things where people think that they're putting themselves at more risk. But the reality is, if it was in their own name, they would still have the same amount of risk, potentially, because you've got to pay the mortgage back.
Absolutely, no question. And indeed, you could argue, I think some lenders limit the level of guarantee to the mortgage commitment, whereas if they were to take out a mortgage in the personal name, it's an open-ended commitment. It's not capped at any liability as far as I'm aware.
There you are. So it could actually be better. Yeah, absolutely. Which is true.
Somebody would obviously have to speak to an accountant about liability and things like that. But just to reiterate, the underwriting and the processing of a limited company mortgage application, it's almost identical to mortgage application in a personal name.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing which you raise, which is very valid, is the costs, because you will have to sit down with a third-party independent solicitor, and the cost, in my experience, usually runs into the hundreds of pounds to sit down with somebody who will basically tell you, if you don't pay the mortgage, then the bank will come and ask you to pay the mortgage nicely. And if you still don't, then they'll come and do things to make sure you do pay the mortgage. That takes about a minute to explain. And I actually challenged a solicitor once when I was sitting with them and said, gosh, you charge an awful lot of money for doing this. And he said, and it's probably true, he said, every bank has slightly different small print, and we have to sort of read through all the paperwork, and that's where that's what you're paying for. It's the time when I'm not with you, where I'm reading through all the small print, which I thought was an interesting answer, and it makes sense. I'm not totally convinced, because I'm sure that it must be very similar from bank to bank. But it's something which people should budget for, sure, certainly, isn't it? Because, as I say, I've paid into the hundreds of pounds. The cheapest I've ever heard was somebody who got away with paying a tenner. But I think that I'm not sure if they just got the solicitor on a very good day that day. They sort of randomly knocked on the door of a solicitor and said, "Can you do this for me?" And were charged a tenner. But
we got them on a good day, Peter.
I think they did.
Well, I think the average I come across these days, between 200 and 300. This is for the independent legal advice.
Yeah.
And if you happen to be in London in the southeast, you can comfortably add on another couple of hundred onto that, sadly.
I hope you found this video useful and informative, and if you did, then please come over to my website www.thepropertyteacher.co.uk, where you'll find loads more great property related resources, including free special reports to download and my best-selling series of ebooks, which includes the Successful Property Renovators Workshop, 63 common defects in investment property and how to spot them. And if you're just starting out in property, or if you want to grow your portfolio, you may be particularly interested in the Successful Property Investors Strategy Workshop, in which I'll take you through exactly how I started and built my property portfolio, starting literally with none of my own money, and how I built a portfolio of £2 million worth of property in just 4 years. And that was starting from scratch. I'll take you through everything that I did right so that you can copy me and do the same. And I'll also show you everything that I did wrong so that you can avoid the mistakes that I made, and so that you can progress in property and be far more successful, far more quickly than I ever was. And this is based upon my own real life experience, and it took me about 4 years to actually work out how to do property investing properly. But in the 200 pages in the Successful Property Investors Strategy Workshop, I'm going to show you all of that 4 years knowledge condensed down so that you can use it immediately. And until next time, here's to successful property investing.